Have you ever witnessed out of control anger? When someone just snaps, when they're in a public setting and they just lose it. When I was thinking about that in the writing of this sermon, I immediately thought of two occasions where I've witnessed that. One was some years ago on a weekday morning when I was driving into church. It was early, 8 o'clock, Tallahassee, 8 o'clock traffic. Approaching a stoplight, a pickup truck's in front of me. Just before we get to the red light, a little sports car in the left-hand lane quickly pulled in front of the pickup truck, causing the pickup truck to slam on brakes, and then I had to slam on brakes. And then the guy in the pickup truck got out of the truck, went up to the car, yelled, screamed, cussed up a storm, shook his fist at him. And as he was coming back to get in his truck, I could see his face, and I realized he's a member of the parish. Not this parish, but a member of the parish. And about the time I realized that, he looked into my car and saw me sitting there in my collar, and I just waved. And he just put his head down and got in the truck. On another occasion, I was running home and last minute stopped by Publix. As I entered an aisle, near the end of the aisle was a woman who was a member of that same parish. And she had a little baby in her arms, a little 3-year-old girl down next to her. The baby was crying. The little girl was pulling things off the shelves, put in the buggy that the woman clearly did not want. And she just lost it. She screamed at the child, and she grabbed whatever it was the child had in her hand and threw it down on the grocery store floor. And of course, then I was in that awkward position because I'm right down the aisle. So what do? So I just rushed up and scooped up the little girl, and I said, "Oh my gosh, y'all are having a terrible day. I've had terrible days like that too." And she started crying, the mother. And we decided to postpone shopping. We pulled off to the side and had a chat. And what I discovered that I didn't know is that she and her husband were in the midst of a divorce. She was wondering how she was going to manage 2 children, a job, maintaining a house. The man told me several days later when he saw me at church that his business was in trouble. He was having a lot of difficulty with business, getting enough business, and he had a client that he was on his way to see that morning. And so both of these people were feeling fear and anxiety and all the tensions and stresses that we experience in life. And it just all came out, unfortunately, against a child and a man who pulled in front of another. Today's sermon is the third in this series I've been doing on the 7 deadly sins. And I'm sure as you realize by now that the sin we're focused on today is anger. Notice I said the sin of anger. We are living in an angry world, aren't we? I mean, if I had to say what is the one emotion that seems to be driving America right now and driving some other countries, I'd have to say is anger. A number of psychologists and journalists have begun to refer to this age as the age of rage. The age of rage. We've seen it in so many political arenas. Politicians whipping up anger to help them accomplish their political goals. We've seen it in the constant violence of mass shootings in our country. Over 170 mass shootings in the first 5 months of this year. In the month of May, there were only 9 days where there were no mass shootings. 95% of those shootings, we know, were by young white males with uncontainable anger. Anger about what? Where's all the anger coming from? Yes, it comes from politics. It can come from racism, from sexism, from economic stress. There clearly is revenge that seems to be at work in virtually all of that anger. But what's underneath it? You know, therapists say that anger is the secondary emotion, that the primary emotion is what's causing the anger. What's underneath? Is it a sense of powerlessness, of fear, of being threatened, of being treated unfairly? Those are the important things to get to, digging down through that anger and asking, what's really going on underneath? According to the Rockefeller Institute, This uncontrollable anger has been going on in our country, at least for a long time. They trace it back to the 60s. You remember, by that time we'd come through 2 world wars, the Great Depression. We were dealing with all the upheaval of civil rights. Right at the end of the 60s, it was the Vietnam War. So all this anger bubbling up during that period. And the Rockefeller Institute has continued to trace that over the decades. And they say, while that was really a high level of anger, that where we are now is like 3 times higher, especially over the last 10 years. So why? Why these last 10 years? What's caused it? Good to have examples in the midst of the sermon. A number of psychologists attribute this spiking anger to, guess what? Social media. Social media. They talk about a thing called rage baiting, where you're being lured into rage. Viral videos from TikTok, Instagram, X, featuring individuals or groups who are expressing fury over some issue. One of my children showed me one of those videos a while back, and it was a woman in her car recording herself just furious about some social evil. Sometimes they videotape situations. I've come to realize that some of those are scripted acting stunts created to whip up animosity about some hot topic in the culture. We know that algorithms reward polarizing content. The more angry people are, the more they're going to hit a website, so let's make them really angry. And how are we dealing with this pandemic of anger? Well, there are those things that seem to be multiplying across the nation. We even have them in little old Tallahassee. They're called rage rooms, or anger rooms, or scream rooms. These are places where you can pay a fee and go into a room that is full of glass and all sorts of other breakables. They give you a bat, they close you up in there. You can break everything in there and scream to your heart's content. And no doubt, that's better than shooting someone. But is it healthy? And is it Christian? Even secular psychologists say that going to such places can feed the rage. Treating anger as a regular coping mechanism can train your brain to equate frustration with aggression, so that every time you're getting frustrated about anything, the way you act that out is through some level of angry aggression. And you even hear Christians say, well, now come on, Eric, anger's a natural thing. God created us that way. We have anger, of course. And look at Jesus. Oh my gosh, he's whipping people in the temple. So come on. If I'm getting mad at the car that flies in front of me, almost creates a terrible traffic accident, how's that different? Jesus and I together on that thing, right? I can't tell you the number of times I've heard, never women, but always men, who use that as their excuse for their anger. Well, Jesus got angry. So it might be useful, I thought, for us to look at that passage where Jesus gets angry. You have that situation that I read this morning in all 3 of the Synoptic Gospels late in his ministry. But then in John, it's early in his ministry. John puts it in a different place for a theological purpose. And John adds something, the whip. Doesn't exist in the Synoptic Gospels. That's John's addition. But let me remind you of the words from John. It says this: in the temple, Jesus found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both sheep and cattle. He drove all of them out of the temple, both sheep and cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and turned over their tables. He didn't whip people. He used a whip, perhaps snapping it in the air to drive large animals out of God's temple. And he turned over the tables. But why? Why was he angry? You remember the temple was divided into sections. Way up there near the priests, front row seating was for Jewish men. So there was a court of the men. And then behind that was the court of the women. And then beyond that was the court of the Gentiles. It was a place provided in God's temple so that non-Jews, non-believers who might have a curiosity about this God of the Jews, who might want to know something about this, who might in time have a love for this God. They were called God-fearers. They could come into that court and they could hear the prayers and see the worship and at some level participate in it. But that very court, the court of the Gentiles, had been taken over by the money changers and those selling animals for sacrifice. So think about this. You've got poor people all over Israel who feel by commandment that they've got to go to Jerusalem to the temple to make sacrifices. Well, some of them are walking great distances. They can't carry an animal or lead an animal that far. And the temple, God bless them, those sweet temple leaders, they said, you know what? We know that's a burden. We don't want that to be a burden. We will supply the animals. You just come on whenever you can. We'll supply the animals for a price, for a high price. And not only will we sell them to you for a high price, making a clean profit, but in addition to that, you can't pay with that Roman coinage that we know you have in your pocket. Caesar's head's on that. That can't be in the temple treasury. So we're going to have these money changers where you can exchange that currency for temple currency to buy your animal. But of course, that's at a cost too. So twice they're hitting these poor people with heavy price tags. So it wasn't just that the leaders of the temple were keeping non-believers from coming to believe, but they were also taking advantage of poor Jews who were trying to be faithful. This is why Jesus' actions in the temple that day are called an example of righteous wrath. Anger for the sake of others. And anger motivated by love. And anger motivated by a protective love. This isn't Jesus having a bad day. This isn't Jesus working out all of his built-up frustrations. This isn't Jesus taking his personal stress out in physical violence. Don't ever use that excuse again, please. It's not that. This is God in Christ coming to the aid of the poor and foreigners. In all three synoptic gospels, at the conclusion of this moment, Jesus says, this house is a house of prayer for all nations. The very words that were used by God when the first temple was built. That should make clear Jesus' motivation. Besides that, Jesus is the one who gave the Sermon on the Mount when he said, if you have hatred towards your brother, it's the same as murdering him in your heart. Our lesson from James this morning says, the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Wouldn't that be a great refrigerator magnet? The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. In this book, some of us have been reading, Self-Help from the Middle Ages by Peter Jones. The author says that Christian writers in the Middle Ages knew how very seductive anger can be. The 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas says we experience some moment of contempt, some spiteful treatment by another person, and it touches deep down inside of us. He says, I love this, next follows an intoxicating blast of sharp, smoky vapor, the anger rising within us. And then an oblivion of rage that darkens our sight and hits us with an astonishing power. St. Augustine says, this feeling can even be blissful for some. They can tend to cherish it, to nurture it in their hearts. Because, he says, anger's power is that it warms us with a single glowing conviction that we are right. Yeah, and we like that. Oh, yeah, that's very seductive. We feel powerful. We can be right. We lord it over our children. Over the neighbors. over the woman in the grocery store, over anybody and everybody. So powerful. But is it Christian? Well, how did middle-aged people deal with this? I mean, that's what this is the reason for writing the book. He was going through his own struggles with depression and other things, anxiety, and he thought, how did Christians in earlier eras deal with this? He goes back to the Middle Ages, because this age is his era of study, and then he produces this book, which then becomes very helpful for us in this age, I think. But in the Middle Ages, he said people were still very much caught up in astrology, the power of the stars to shape our feelings and actions. They thought that people born in certain signs like Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, which includes both Father Gene and myself. Isn't that right? We're both Leos, and it says that we have a hot, cold nature and are more prone to irritation. I've seen that in you. Have you noticed that?
Belinda says the same thing. It's a conspiracy.
Well, don't talk to Belinda. Exactly. So what do you do about that? Well, you have to watch for the conjunction of these planets, right? So that you're taking actions at the right time astrologically. Physicians at the time, though, had another idea that they put stock in, that it's bodily fluids, humors they call them, within us. And there has to be a balance of the humors because they affect our feelings and actions. Black bile, which you can imagine is digestive fluid, causes us to be more melancholy, more anxious. So what do you do about that, doctor? Well, you take a laxative. If you're feeling anxious, go get some Miralax. It'll cure you up right quick. Don't worry. They said too much yellow bile causes frustration and anger. You treat that with mustard and spices. Too much phlegm causes sluggishness. So how do you get rid of that? Well, you don't want to know. It's a bunch of purging that goes on to get rid of that. If it's too much blood, that causes an overzealous passion, impulsiveness. And the way you deal with that, well, of course, you open a vein or you grab a bunch of leeches and place them on your body. This is how they understood and tried to deal with anger. Thank goodness we have modern medicine. But I don't know that always treats it as it should either. One doctor in the Middle Ages made a really good point when he said too much anger pulls us away from reason, such that it is like a puppeteer that has taken control of our brains and bodies. Have you ever had that moment? Have you ever seen that moment? When someone is just so furious that it's like they're not themselves for that moment. It's like a puppeteer called anger has taken over. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but in this study of the 7 deadly sins, they're listed in order of importance. And the first one was pride, and we talked about how that is the foundation of all the other deadly sins. The second was envy. And then after envy is anger. But why is anger lower than envy? Because at least, says Peter Jones, at least anger sometimes can be for the good of others. And pride and envy are never for the good of others. He goes into this paragraph or two about the dominant ways that they dealt with or understood anger in that era. One was the Stoics. The Stoics, as you can imagine, thought that any kind of anger at any level is always wrong because it showed that you have a lack of control. They believed you need to restrain all troubled emotions, rely on reason alone as your guide. We sometimes talk about the Brits as having a stiff upper lip, right? Just be in control. Just be in control. Standing against them were these others that came to be called the warriors of the culture, who believed that rage was a good thing. Repressing anger, biting your tongue, it's just like swallowing black gall, they said. It's better to embrace the power. Still have a lot of those people today. But there was a Cistercian Christian monk, Thomas of Persan, who said there are 3 kinds of anger, basically. He said there's defective, which usually comes from deep insecurity, and it causes someone to snap with fury over every little thing. You ever known anybody like that? Every day they're mad about something. Mad about a friend, mad about the cashier at the grocery store, mad about something. Every day. Explosions. Defective anger. He said then there's affective, with an A, anger, which is provoked by injustice. They see something wrong. The only problem is that anger becomes so consuming that the injustice is never really effectively addressed because this person just becomes eaten up with the anger. Have you not seen that sometimes out in our own culture? People get so mad about something that is wrong, but they get so mad about it that they're not helping address the issue. They're just consumed by the rage. Affective anger. And then he says finally there is effective anger, with an E, where you channel your pain or your grievance into positive action. Affective anger can keep you from seeing beyond the anger, but effective anger can help you not only see the thing that needs to be seen, but to move beyond the anger to positive resolution, to accomplishing something good. If you're reading it with me, this book, you know that Peter Jones goes on and on then with other examples of good and bad forms of anger. And he has this one section that's worth reading. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but he talks about the absolutely destroyed friendship between King Henry II and Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the closest of friends, sharing so many things. The friendship gets blown up because of pride. Pride. Who has more power? Who has more control? The Archbishop or the king? And it destroys the friendship. And it feeds this anger in the king that becomes so great that what does he do? Well, he sends men to kill the Archbishop. And those of you who visited Canterbury Cathedral know that that spot is still marked today where the Archbishop was slain, cold blood, right in God's cathedral. Horrible moment, really affected the history of England. But one of Becket, the Archbishop's closest friends, Herbert of Bosham, during this same period of time, he's creating this wonderful commentary on the Psalms. And as he goes through this one psalm that's dealing with anger, in the margins of this commentary, he draws a figure of a naked man burning up with fire, but with a face that is filled with apology. And he writes the words in Latin, "The man is on fire, God is in the man." So he's writing it in the margins of this one section of the Psalms dealing with anger. He's just lost one of his dear friends because of anger. And he draws this little naked man on fire with those words. It seems what he's trying to say to us is that we have to find a way to hold righteousness together with peace, together with a tranquil mind. Righteousness with a tranquil mind. In Ephesians, St. Paul writes, "Be angry but don't sin." Be angry but don't sin. What he's saying is, yeah, it's okay to have anger when it's for the good of others, but don't sin by letting that lead you to ungodly bitterness, hatefulness, destructive words, or even violence, because those things are not Christian. In that commentary on the Psalms, this same fellow, Herbert of Bosham, he wrote that the wrath of God is never the kind of anger that expresses itself through drawing blood, through violence, but through constructive action. The best way to deal with anger, says Peter Jones, is not to deny it, but to put it to work until, he says, our bitterness becomes a sweetness for the sake of others. Like the burning man, the goal is to have two things at once. Calm composure, while still feeling the motivative power of a righteous anger. Says Peter Jones, without fury, we might lose sight of the things that matter out there, that are wrong in this world. You need a little bit of anger to move you about these things. This is terrible that we're doing this out in the world. Okay, that's good. But without composure, we might never arrive at any lasting resolution to the broken realities of this world. How can we as Christian people make sure that anger is not controlling our lives? That when we express anger, it's for the good of others, for the glory of God, and not just another way of allowing pride to override love. Well, here's a cool idea. I found this online through the C.S. Lewis Institute. They said, you know what you need to do? Create an anger journal for just a week. Just a week. Create a little journal, and every single moment of every day that you have anger, write it down. Some of us probably need to get a really thick journal for that week. Write it down and do several things. Give it a scale. Is that particular anger at that moment on a 1 to 5 scale? 5 being the highest motion. What is it? What prompted it? What contributed to it? Politics, too much liquor, social media, job loss, traffic jam. And then ask, what was the root underneath that? What was I feeling? Was I feeling powerlessness, fear, pain, hurt, grief? And then the most important question, ask, what was the fruit of that anger? All that anger bubbling up, what did it accomplish that was good? Having been married now for 41 years, Belinda and I have gotten to a place where when we feel anger bubbling up, and you know it's nearly always just superficial kinds of stuff, right? And you feel it bubbling up, to be able to stop yourself and say, okay, you know what? Is this worth it? Is it worth ruining the night? Is it worth ruining the weekend? Being able to refocus our thoughts and feelings to the cross of Christ, to the love of God, so that we can then just let that anger go. I'm thinking of that one line from James that was read this morning. It might be a great thing for us to put on the refrigerator, in the bathroom mirror, and the dashboard of the car. The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Amen.